Welcome, everyone, to this first episode of this series of videos and podcasts where we will talk about topics related to identity, biometrics, and technology. Today, we will specifically talk about fraud. In recent months, over the past year, it has posed a significant threat across many diverse sectors and also impacts our trust in digital transactions and our understanding of new technologies. To help us better understand this, to give us an overview of the current landscape and share experiences from conversations with clients and various industry figures, we have Mikel Sánchez, who is the Solution Engineering Director here at Veridas. Thank you, Mikel, for joining us.
How's it going, Juanfer?
Thank you. Mikel has extensive experience in the development and implementation of artificial identity solutions and biometrics, which are ultimately powerful tools to protect us in the digital and physical world. So let's get right into it, Mikel, if that sounds good to you. As we've been discussing, identity fraud has grown and increased significantly in recent years. To give you some figures, it's estimated that 85% of fraud cases are created using synthetic identities, which we will discuss later. In the US, there's a statistic that says an identity theft case occurs every 22 seconds. This is concerning and highlights the frequency and scope of all these crimes. Mikel, could you describe a bit how this current landscape looks based on your experience and your conversations with clients about fraud in various sectors?
Yes, identity fraud is something that, while we are seeing it now in the digital realm, is not new. It has existed long before the internet and long before we started doing processes through digital means. People have carried out processes in the physical environment. For example, in the banking sector, 10, 15, 20 years ago, people would go in person to a branch to open a bank account, and there was identity fraud happening there. So I think the first message I would like to convey is that identity fraud is not something new, and it's not something that the internet brought about, nor is it something that artificial intelligence itself has introduced. It's something that already existed before. In fact, identity fraud existed in the physical environment and in non-digital settings. It's a type of identity fraud that is somehow less auditable, where there is no record or evidence, unlike in the digital environment, making it more hidden and even harder to quantify. It remains a bit hidden in the digital realm. In the digital realm, identity fraud can somehow be seen, it can be evidenced, it can be counted, and it can be quantified. So I think it's a very important change in terms of how identity fraud is approached or considered. And in the last 10 years, which we could already classify as the part in which identity fraud has been digitalized, it has moved from that more face-to-face environment to the digital environment, without forgetting that fraud still exists today. Well, it has gone from being an identity fraud, so to speak, individualized, that is, specific isolated cases, lone wolves, as we could call them in other areas, to more organized gangs that what they do is try to create an industry around identity fraud and industrialize identity fraud. That is, not to carry out a single act of identity fraud, but to try to commit a repetitive number of fraud and identity fraud that ultimately allows them to what? So it allows them to achieve the same thing they could before in the physical realm, which is to try to gain a fundamentally economic benefit. That's a bit of the evolution, and I understand that we will now delve into more points.
Yes, you introduced this topic of the types of attacks very well. It's really interesting what you said about the trace you mentioned, which in the physical environment was a bit more diffuse when an attack occurred, but in the digital world, that trace is somewhat marked. And that's where all these new technologies, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes, come in to try to prevent and also protect us when fraud has already been committed. But to get back to what you mentioned about those types more of attacks, I would like to introduce the two types of identity fraud attacks we talked about: presentation attacks and injection attacks. You already made a bit of a distinction earlier between those that are more scalable than others. In the end, the concern is across all sectors. It's not just for one sector. The need is for everyone, both to protect ourselves and to prevent. Could you tell us more or less the characteristics of both the action and the injection attacks?
Yes, well, presentation attacks are those in which the attacker shows the camera sensor false evidence, let's say. Basically, what does it consist of? It consists of when an identity verification solution requests, for example, a photo of the identity document or a selfie, instead of capturing the actual document or the real selfie, what the attacker does is show, for example, a photo of a photo or a photocopy, or in the case of facial recognition, they might show or wear a mask with varying degrees of sophistication. That's a presentation attack. And on the other hand, an injection attack is an attack based more on aspects of, let's say, cyber. And by cyber, I mean the act of trying to introduce into the system, trying to introduce. We can use any of these words, that evidence, that image of the document or the selfie through the channel itself. So regarding the channel itself, I mean injecting it and introducing it through an API. Introducing it or injecting it through elements such as a virtual camera. In a way, we are trying to deceive the system into believing that what is being introduced into the system was captured by the camera sensor, by a photographic camera, when in reality, a real photographic camera was never used to capture that image. That would be a brief summary of the characteristics of both types of attacks. At Veridas, we have technology to protect ourselves against presentation attacks and injection attacks.
I understand that we will also discuss more about how these solutions you mentioned are already being tested and developed to prevent these attacks. Miki, we could say that we can differentiate the two in that presentation attacks might be a bit less scalable than injection attacks. When an injection attack enters a system, for example, of a bank or a telecommunications company, could we say that the damage could be greater because of that scalability?
Yes, without a doubt, without a doubt. In the end, we can see it, we can explain it in a way that everyone can understand. When an attacker carries out a presentation attack, in the end, let's say they physically have to present that image, the photocopy or that mask in front of the sensor. And that ultimately takes time, whatever it may be. It can be 1 min, 2 min, 5 min. But carrying out that onboarding process through a presentation attack, let's say it takes a few minutes. Of course, an attacker can repeat it and can spend many hours of their day and several days to carry out that type of attack. But in the end, each attack is an individualized attack. It's individual, it's unique, and it's specific. In the context of injection attacks, what the attacker can ultimately do is automate the process of introducing or injecting these images into the system. So if you find a security breach, if you find a way to be able to inject those images and that evidence into the system, you no longer have to enter them manually. Therefore, it will no longer require several minutes to carry out the process, but through simple automation, you can introduce dozens, hundreds, or thousands of processes into the system in a matter of seconds. And that's why injection attacks are more dangerous. because they are more industrializable and can generate a much higher level of identity fraud than what you can achieve with presentation attacks.
Very interesting, Mikel. And to continue talking about this, a bit more focused on these two types of fraud attacks, you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that identity fraud is not something that has just emerged in recent years. It has been around for quite some time. Is it true that all this digitalization has gradually increased this? And well, undoubtedly in recent years, with the rise of artificial intelligence, it has made it, as we sometimes like to say, right. It has democratized fraud with tools that can quickly and cheaply, we could say economically, enable this type of fraud. These tools that we will mention below, these solutions, have to fight against this new generative artificial intelligence that has enhanced this. What would you say, Mikel, is the way to fight against these generative AI threats? I understand that they are with technologies that are powered by the same artificial intelligence.
Yes, absolutely. In the end, we talk about these types of attacks, especially the most dangerous and industrializable ones, which are injection attacks. It's important to keep in mind that they are fundamentally linked to the use of images created with generative artificial intelligence, deepfakes, and things like that. Of course, an attacker can generate a fake image using generative guidance and can use it through a presentation attack, i.e., he can display it through a photocopy in front of the sensor, a photo on the screen, etc. However, despite this, in the previous context, the most dangerous process is that the attacker has to repeat those processes one by one, and therefore it doesn't make it industrializable. It makes the attack one-on-one, individual. However, in the context of the injection attacks we mentioned earlier, which can be industrialized, just as the introduction or injection of those fake images into the system can be industrialized or automated, generative AI and the tools that exist to create deep fakes also allow for the automation of that part. In other words, the image that is introduced or injected into the system is created with generative AI. Given this, there are different approaches to address this problem. One of them is also the use of artificial intelligence technologies to deploy algorithms that can detect whether an image used in a system has been generated with artificial intelligence and is not a real image. Just as there is technology to generate attacks, there is also technology to prevent those attacks. That is something we have to consider, and we have already been working on this type of technology. We've been working on artificial intelligence technologies since 2012, especially on technologies to prevent deepfakes and generative AI long before it became democratized for about 4 years now. In this sense, it's also important to highlight that the approach usually taken in the field of fraud detection goes even beyond artificial intelligence. Many times we talk about a holistic or complete approach to identity fraud detection. And this is because to prevent identity fraud, especially the kind that is carried out in an industrialized manner using generative AI, only our artificial intelligence techniques are used. It's not one AI fighting against another AI. Not only that, it's an AI, along with a set of other security measures that don't necessarily have to use artificial intelligence, but rather employ other types of cybersecurity technologies to fight against that generative AI that is trying to carry out the impersonation attack. So, to summarize, against generative AI used in identity verification, we fight with artificial intelligence, but also with other types of technologies that go beyond that approach.
Great. I understand that, as you said, to fight against that volume, that industrialization, we need to develop solutions that are used as links in a chain. In the end, that bunch of solutions will fight against the threat of generative AI and the fraud it enables. To summarize as well, which we haven't mentioned above, Mikel, these frauds, both presentation fraud and yes, totally.
In the end, here at Veridas, we develop technology to prevent identity fraud, especially that which is carried out with generative AI. One of the big differentiators we have is that we develop our technology in a 100% proprietary way. That has two effects regarding identity fraud. Is that we obviously have the ability to react very quickly to the changes that exist in the identity fraud paradigm. It exists, has existed, and will exist, and it will evolve just as it has evolved in the past. Therefore, having 100% proprietary technology allows us to react very quickly to those changes that are going to happen and that have also happened in the past. On the other hand, another of the key and differential aspects of having 100% proprietary technology for document, face, and voice verification is that it allows us to use the results of those investigations that we achieve in one of the areas in the other area. I want to say that we don't investigate separately. That is to say, the advancements we achieve in detecting identity fraud, for example, in the facial domain, often lead in some way to the voice domain or the document domain, etc. So that generates a series of synergies, a series actually of benefits that feed into each other, resulting in Veridas being a company that is absolutely a leader in identity fraud detection. As evidence, we have the certifications that we hold at Veridas. At Veridas, we have certification from iBeta according to ISO 30107 for level 1 and level 2, both for active and passive liveness testing at the facial level in both the mobile application environment and the web environment. So that makes Veridas unique because only Veridas and one other company in the world have such a complete level of certification. And in the area of voice that you just mentioned, Juanfer, Veridas is the only company in the world that has certified its voice liveness testing technology according to this ISO, specifically ISO 30107 with iBeta at level 1. And well, this is an example of all the work we do at Veridas, of all those developments, of how they feed into each other, and of that synergy and the result of having 100% proprietary technologies that we work on at Veridas.
Absolutely. And I understand that these benefits ultimately come in the offering of identity verification and authentication solutions that Veridas provides, like these layers of security for face, voice, and documents that you mentioned are certified by these organizations. They are part of that same offering of solutions. It's like a comprehensive solution, not just a separate feature that only addresses fraud. No, in the end, the whole solution itself for verifying identity already includes these layers of security and fraud detection.
Yes, totally. In the end, one thing can't be understood without the other. One, for precisely one of the points I was just mentioning, is that identity fraud changes, evolves, and it does so very quickly, very, very quickly. Therefore, as identity partners for our clients at Adani, as their security providers, we have to react very quickly to those needs, and we can't dilute our responsibility by putting the onus on the client to update or consume this. Instead, we have to be the ones who, in a comprehensive manner, deploy those solutions, those algorithms, and those improvements within the product so that they are as transparent as possible for the client. That's just how we're doing it. A very concrete example we can talk about, for instance, is specifically speaking from just a month or two ago in the recent past with a well-known and reputable financial institution that we have been collaborating with located in the European region, which has recently encountered a notable and significant increase in the number of identity fraud attempts. And I'm going to say attempts because they were not successful and they were not successful. because thanks to Veridas solution, we had deployed a new capability for detecting those advanced identity frauds, and we did it in a completely transparent way for the client. In this case, for the financial institution, the financial institution didn't have to make any changes or updates to enjoy that improvement. So, in the end, everything is connected. The development of 100% proprietary technologies, reacting very quickly from an algorithmic standpoint to new threats, but also deploying it in a very fast and transparent way in the products so that clients can fully utilize it.
In the end, Mikel, we would say that the concrete benefits of this more comprehensive vision of these solutions could be the reduction of operational costs to prevent and avoid fraud, also protecting the reputation and infrastructure of all our clients, which would lead to clients having greater trust in organizations or companies. All of this is protected and backed by compliance with regulations aligned with user data protection. In the end, it's a holistic solution.
Yes, of course, it's a holistic solution where identity verification solutions, and particularly the solutions we provide at Veridas, are not only deployed to prevent fraud, but are often implemented to achieve regulatory compliance. That is, for example, to carry out a bank account opening in accordance with the applicable regulations in each country, to prevent underage gambling, etc. That is everything related to compliance, but the same solutions that are implemented to prevent fraud and comply with regulations at the same time also serve to be a business driver. In other words, in the end, identity, biometrics, and all these types of technologies we are talking about are vectors for carrying out new business models that have been implemented in recent years and that are allowing entities to ultimately improve their bottom line. In other words, opening new digital customers, verifying identity when you want to offer them certain products, such as, for example, a consumer loan, avoiding the rental of a vehicle or a motorcycle, booking a hotel room. These are processes that can be done remotely, requiring all the layers of security we've talked about before. But they are business vehicles that are enabling, as I said, new use cases more and more so that they serve organizations not just as a necessary evil. In other words, identity and biometrics are not a necessary evil, rather, they are a vehicle to achieve, as I said, doing business and ultimately improving the bottom line and the experience of end users.
Absolutely. In the end, all these tools, all these technological solutions that you mentioned are going to advance at a frantic pace. What we're looking for is that support to help all clients, all companies grow together and face these challenges like the ones we've talked about regarding fraud and the generative guidance for its good use, its bad use, and all these technological solutions to combat it. Mikel, thank you for sharing your experience and for showing us this side of Veridas and how it's leading the way globally in the fight against fraud prevention and growing alongside clients through identity verification technologies. We hope to have you soon in upcoming episodes. Thank you, Mikel. Thank you very much, Juanfer. A hug and nothing. We invite all our audience to visit our LinkedIn profile and our website to learn more about these technologies. See you in the next episode. Thank you.